freedom and personal responsibility. And Brittany and I have talked a little bit about how freedom and a lot of freedom and personal responsibility align or have conflicts with law and order, right? So we're going to talk about that kind of thing and her journey, but also I just want to say this does not represent the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. She's here as a guest off the clock and just talk about those things. So Brittany, why don't you tell us about your journey from where you're from to where you're at now?
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So originally I'm from a small town just west of Wichita. So I grew up on dirt roads, fields, and that was my life growing up in the small town. About 3,500 people. My sister, my brother, my family, we all lived there. And then after I graduated high school, I went to Kansas State University, where I graduated with a degree in sociology, and I knew that I wanted to do something in public service. So I ended up doing an internship with Wichita Police Department, decided that law enforcement would be the best career path for me at that time. And wound up in Kansas City, Kansas, which is now where I call home, raised my 2 kids there. And so I enjoy it. It's home now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you've been in law enforcement for how long now?
So I've been there with the police department for 16 years now. So moved up through the ranks, started as a patrol officer, then became a detective for about 5 years. And then after that, I became a captain in the field, and then now major as well.
Okay. So, we believe that all women and men are born with the right to freedom. And so we recognize some of the journeys of women are more difficult than others. So has your journey as a woman in law enforcement, what's that been like?
It's a lot of people ask me that question about what that's like being a female in law enforcement. So I always knew that I was getting in a male-dominant profession, but I never looked at myself as a female compared to males. It was, here, I'm going to do the same job that you're going to do. I had the same expectations and same goals and dreams that you may have. But I would say that, as a law enforcement officer, when you're responding to calls for service as a female, sometimes you get a little bit more respect, and sometimes, it could be the complete opposite. But sure. I haven't noticed it as a huge deal. I guess, moving up through the ranks as a female, there can be challenges, but it's one of those things where I just, I know what I bring to the table, so I'm going to bring that to the table every time that I have a meeting or have some sort of event that I go to. I know what I'm qualified to do, so I don't compare myself to men.
Yeah, it seems like just about any circle, it always depends a lot on how a person carries himself.
Oh, for sure.
So,
yeah, I think it's all about how you represent yourself when you're into the room. I mean, that's the biggest thing is, when you walk into the room and you know what you're going to bring to that table, or what you're capable of bringing. I think that's the most important thing.
Degree of confidence.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome. So what do you think over the years, has there been any challenges other than that maybe, or what's been one of the more challenging things in your career?
Yeah, so I would say that even over the last few years, we've had a lot of public backlash, a lot of media, a lot of people that just don't agree with what either police work, how we handle ourselves, or some sort of policies that police departments have. So starting a few years ago after George Floyd, we had a lot of policy changes that needed to be made in law enforcement, good. I think it forced us as agencies and police departments to look at what our policies and procedures were. Are our officers actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? Proper use of force techniques, just even interacting with people. I think that was a good time for us to actually look at policies. But it also brought up a lot of open conversations that we needed to have with people anyway. What does that mean as a law enforcement officer? How are we interacting with the public? Good, bad, or indifferent?
Yeah, that's awesome. So maybe not only policies, it's sort of the attitude that we carry in our work. And
most definitely.
Yep. People. And I always think of the Andy Griffith style of law enforcement. A big Andy Griffith fan.
Most definitely.
Of course, that was just a show, but how do you take that sort of soft, empathetic approach and still be have law and order?
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, and I think at that point in time, it required us as law enforcement to actually listen Our job is to go out and enforce laws and enforce, different things. But I think during that, period of time, and even now, it requires us to sit down and have conversations openly about, concerns what the public may have with us or things that, they think that we need to change. So Good dialogue.
Yeah. As difficult as some of those things have been over the last 5-10 years, it does seem like society's made several adjustments, not only in law enforcement, but how we perceive law enforcement, how we conduct ourselves when we interact with law enforcement. I think it takes all of us, right? So, I think about the video I think you've seen where I spoke about the importance of personal responsibility and free reign. We definitely want as much freedom as we can get. Same time, it requires a lot of personal responsibility from us. And you and I got talking about that's great, but not everybody acts with a great deal of responsibility. So we've seen that where maybe local agencies have sort of defunded or just reduced the level of resources given to law enforcement. And you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So I guess the good question is can society police itself, I guess, right? So, people want more freedoms, less government control, less, laws, which I understand. But then again, it would require us as a society to be able to police ourselves and to make sure that everybody is following certain standards, right? Moral standards, ethical standards. There's certain laws in place for a reason. And that's where, of course, law enforcement steps in because, you can't kill people. You can't, it's robbing people, stealing from others. So I think that's where it comes with, whether that be a group, society, or what that looks like to be able to make sure that everybody's following a certain standard.
Yeah, I agree. It comes down to values too, right? Because we're all raised a little bit differently, and we learn our personal values at a very young age, right? And it's reinforced throughout our life. And so I think it is an interesting dynamic to go through that exercise where we sort of put controls on what law enforcement can do, and that puts more ownership in the people's hands. Yeah. And it seems like we do see problems with that.
Well, you've seen that with several states. I mean, they say, Minnesota, other states have said, well, I'm going to take back your control. Now I don't want you to police.
Right.
And the cities have literally gone completely in chaos. And now they're saying, well, okay, now I'll give you funding back because I see what happens when police and there's no law and order.
Yes.
So there's a good, bad, I think it becomes, how do you train a society, or how do you build up a society that says, yes, we can police our own?
Yeah. And you said it earlier, like law enforcement is there to enforce the law. So if there are issues with the laws, we can talk about that, right? And we can make changes to laws, right, that you then enforce.
Right. I don't make the laws.
And then there is the question of how you enforce it, and we've seen some issues with that. But by and large, the law enforcement community does an excellent job. We love law enforcement and love what you all do and respect what you all do. So it does. It's interesting because we do want people to have as much freedom as they possibly can have. We also recognize how important it is that people act responsibly at the same time, and we've seen evidence that can be challenging, and that we also recognize we need law and order, right? So it is a interesting dynamic. It's something that it's, I guess, rather than what we have been experiencing, where we're sort of confined into this box where we're supposed to live a certain way and act a certain way and can only see and listen to certain things. They're really.
But do you think that's tied to social media and everything? That's
a big part. It's media and social media, right? Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely changed substantially recently. So that is a big challenge, and we recognize law and order is also being challenged with that because we people do want more freedoms, but then when they don't act responsibly, it's like,
well, that's the problem.
what the hell?
But do you go back and say, that we're not raising our generations to be able to understand, what does that mean to be free? I mean, have we pushed, societal, what they norms or societal ideations on our kids and saying, but we have not raised our generations to be able to handle themselves without.
I think that is true. I think that is true. That's right. Parenting's a big part of this equation, right?
Yeah.
Even to our school systems.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it all has to work together, and it is definitely not working.
There's a lot of things that have changed. I mean, even from, when we were in high school or school, it's completely different than what they're, what my kids are learning in school now from what I learned.
Yeah.
Just social norms are totally different too.
Yeah.
We have a society that says, this is going to be forced upon you, my kids. I want you to believe this and this and this, without taking into equation of what the parents'
absolutely
responsibility and what they want.
Right.
So I think it's part of it's like a generational thing, or just the way that we haven't brought our kids up to think on their own or to understand what freedom actually means. Right. I think it's
very true.
Part of it.
I actually hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Absolutely big. And it even goes to the level of leadership across our country, right? I've spoken about this before. Leadership determines the level of an organization, and I will say that's the same for a neighborhood or a community or state and federal government, right? We keep putting people in leadership positions that have absolutely no idea what leadership is. And that's been the case for 2 decades, right? So we got to stop doing that. But that goes down to the local level and all kinds of organizations, right? We have to definitely do a better job of understanding what quality leadership looks like, because it definitely determines or has a big impact on how we live. We don't think about those things, but it absolutely does.
But then it's up to us to create those leaders, right?
It absolutely is.
Most definitely.
Right.
Build up those leaders when we leave.
Absolutely. So I think we got to start with our youngsters, parenting, schools, all the way through their development. And then as adults, we have to start understanding what good leadership is, or great leadership, and start expecting that from everywhere, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Because we put people in leadership positions, and then they're in a position where they have an ability to, empower others. And if they don't know what that means, then we get a bunch of crap.
Well, yep. I think you see that day in and day out.
Every day.
Yeah. You have leaders that, they're not leaders. They're more just, whether that be a boss or just somebody in authority.
Right.
So
right.
I think that's important for us to continue to cultivate what that means to be a leader, what that means, whether that be in your house, the school, or like you said, in your community. I think that's important to.
So what are y'all doing in that way as an organization to help youngsters understand the importance of law and order, and your, as officers, your role in the community, and how does that work in your organization?
Yeah, so I think that, so our community policing unit's quite large in our department. We've got officers in every different districts. And I've spent hours upon hours having conversations with people, inviting them into my office or inviting them to do ride-alongs, just showing them what we do as in law enforcement. But it's also having, we have tons of meetings about what our policies and procedures look like. I'm part of several different committees and boards that, talk about what their expectations of law enforcement are and what realistically what we do. Because of course there's a media version of what we do, and then there's what we actually do.
Yeah.
And so I think it's always that constant dialogue about, their perception versus what we do, or, their issues and concerns, and actually listening. I think that's hard for a lot of people to do, is actually listen and hear your faults, right? Nobody wants to listen.
Everybody out there hear that? Because
that's the hardest thing for people to do.
Yeah, that's one of our biggest challenges as a country, as a society. We are not listening to each other. Everybody's wrong if they don't believe or agree with us. Right? Yeah, it's a bunch of crap.
Had a conversation with my 12-year-old daughter the other day about what that means to actually listen. Your views, you may have your opinions, you may have your views. That's fine, great, right? Everybody should. But what does that actually mean when somebody else has a different opinion from you?
That's right.
So
that's an important discussion. We should all be having that.
Right.
Yeah.
So as a community, so that's it. I think it's important for us to build that community relationship and have those community ties, because without that, I mean, law enforcement we wouldn't be as successful as we are.
I know KCK's had a couple of things in its history, and still dealing with, a little bit of that. But I've been impressed over the last, the time that I've been in that we've went through all those things that have happened in the country and haven't really had that kind of, outcry in KCK. And I would attribute that to a few different things. I'm interested on why you think that is in KCK.
I think it's because of the community relationships that we've always had. Our officers have always been able to go to community events, community meetings, actually having that one-on-one relationship with them.
Okay.
And that's a lot different than other agencies, because they don't have that time, they don't have that availability. Just across the state line, of course. I mean, they've a little bit more issues, but they also don't have the time to be able to sit down as much maybe as we do.
Yeah.
But I think it's, community policing was started back in 97, I think, somewhere around there. So it's been around for a long time.
Okay.
But I think it's made a huge impact on what our organization looks like and how we actually interact with people.
Yeah, it's cool. It makes sense. I also think about diversity in that community.
For sure.
And the organization.
Most definitely.
All kinds of different perspectives that are represented at the table.
Yep. And you have to have that. I think it's important because, like you said, KCK is super diverse.
Yeah.
And so, we've got tons of different ethnicities, and so it's important for us as a law enforcement agency to represent that as well. So we're always looking for, especially more females in law enforcement, but looking for anybody, that has an interest in public service. No matter what your background is, it's important to, I think, give back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a great example of how diversity and different, multiple perspectives at the table all the time in that community. I think It does go a long ways. I know I've experienced it myself, so that's been awesome. So, anything about for people interested in law enforcement, not even just women, but anybody, and any advice to them that you might have?
Yeah, so I would say that over the last few years, law enforcement has got a bad rap, but I will tell you that the job is super rewarding. I always say that it's kind of like a front row seat to the best circus of your life. It's something different every day. It is, but you're able to give back. I mean, you see people at their worst, and you're able to actually be there and help them and see the end. Sometimes I think it's super rewarding. I would say that anybody that has an interest in it, do a ride along. Come to our police academy and see what our Citizens Academy looks like. To actually get a little bit of a glimpse of what we do, because social media is not going to give you everything. I mean, it's going to be completely one-sided, or you're always going to see maybe not always the best side of us. But I would say that if anybody has an interest in it, I think it's important that just take a glimpse in it. I think it's fun. It's you're constantly chasing that adrenaline, that next, it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
I would say all the way around.
Okay. How about young people that might be in high school? How would they?
Yeah. So, and actually within law enforcement, you don't have to have a college degree. But I would say, it's important to have that secondary education. I always encourage kids to, if they have an interest in college, it's great to have. But to be a law enforcement, you have to be 21 years of age with a high school diploma. And so I would say that if that's something that, an 18-year-old's interested in, look into public service, look into the unified government. There's plenty of job openings. It's a great step to get into public service, whether that just be with us or, public works.
What would be the obstacles for a young person, or things that might deter them that really aren't deterrents, they just are misinformed? What does a young person need to be thinking to avoid or to focus on to be a candidate to be a law enforcement?
So, being on the Kansas side, there's a lot of things that are not legal in the state of Kansas. I think that it's important for kids that want to get into public service or into any sort of government agency. I think it's important to think about, things that maybe making sure that you're staying out of trouble, making sure that you're making the right decisions, making sure that the people that you're hanging out with are making good decisions. And it's being able to stay away from the drugs and being able to, keep your, not getting DUIs, not getting arrested. So it's making those smart decisions, because as a law enforcement officer, you have to make good decisions on a daily basis, because what you're ended up doing is you're arresting or you're dealing with people who are not making good decisions.
Sure.
So you have to be on the up and up.
Oh, excuse me. Makes complete sense. I was thinking about you mentioned the people that they spend time around, right? We all know that we are who we surround ourselves with, right? And particularly young people, because we're just more easily influenced when we're younger. So for all you young people out there, you may not recognize this, or it may be hard to understand, but it means a lot to the rest of your life. So you want to spend time around people that will push you in a positive way, hold you accountable when you need to be held accountable, raise the bar that challenge you to be a great person, right?
Influential, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you want people that build you up, not, yes. I mean, they have to be able to be on the same path that you are. You know, I mean, you don't want to be stagnant,
Right.
Most everybody has dreams and goals, right? So you want to make sure that your people that you surround yourself with have the same caliber.
Yeah. And all of us, struggle with that growing up a little bit here and there, right? We find ourselves in tough situations, and sometimes it's just luck. We get through it. But
right.
If you can do anything as a young person, or even at any age, it is pay attention to who you spend time with, because that will make or break you eventually. So,
well, I think it's important to think about, it's hard for kids to think about the future instead of the right now. So
right.
it's you have to think about into the future as to what that looks like. Your actions now, I mean, they're going to make a difference later.
Yeah, and it might mean leaving friendships that you grew up with to get away from it.
Yep.
That can be tough.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But definitely word of wisdom.
Yes.
So kind of back to that personal responsibility and law and order, I'm going to continue to push for as much freedom as we can get as a society, and we're going to continue to recognize that it takes a great deal of personal responsibility. So, sort of to wrap it up, how do you align law and order with the free reign concept or free reign life?
I think it's up to us, right? I mean, I think it's up to us as society and us to be able to say, this is what I want, but having and holding other people accountable for their actions, right? I mean, you ultimately have to be able to say, you know what, we don't want the government stepping in, or we don't want these laws, but it's up to us to say, okay, this is the standard, right? This is what we have to do to get there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's ultimately up to everybody.
Well, I think being a person of high responsibility, also as a person that recognizes, I probably am going to screw up once in a while, and that accountability is important.
For sure.
We have to accept that there has to be accountability.
Most definitely. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I think that's something.
Yeah, it is. And so Major Brittanie Pruitt of Kansas City, Kansas Police Department, we really appreciate your time. We're proud of you, and we support you and your colleagues very much. And we hope to have you on the show again sometime soon.
Sounds great. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Live your free reign. Thank you.